Welcome to you all. This is the third in our series of Hatmill huddles, focusing on change and organisational readiness for change. The previous two were what do your teams need to succeed, and also why siloed working is hurting your profit and your people. The focus today is on performance, the high cost of low morale. If you want to watch the previous two, then I'm sure we'll be sharing the link to the recordings of those previous two in the chat on this call. Or alternatively, if you go to Hatmill's LinkedIn posts, a number of that's been posted a few times, I think. So you can click on the link there if you want to see it. I'm joined today, as I have been on the previous two, by Linzi Parry. So Linzi's our deep expert on organisational change and readiness. And she'll be sort of doing most of the talking today on the detail of the subject. In terms of why we thought it was a good idea to launch this series, we've had an increasing focus on organisational readiness and change at Hatmill over the last couple of years, because what we started to recognise was that many of our projects where we're launching new warehouses and things, in that you can only achieve so much by laying the concrete, putting the racking up, getting it labelled and having a system that works. But you overlook the people and change aspects at your peril. And rather than just expecting people to file into a new warehouse and everything to suddenly work, we can guarantee or improve the chances, should I say, of success by really addressing the challenges of project change and readiness. And we've got a little chart, I think, on the next page that shows typically what you'd aim for and what you'd like to expect in terms of the level of performance and productivity as you go through change. But in reality, it tends to dip, and you need to have people prepared for that and know what to do when that happens. And that's been a big theme of some of our topics that we've talked about over the last couple of months on these huddles. In terms of the format for today, we've probably got about 20-25 minutes of Linzi and I having a chat on today's subject around low morale and its cost in terms of performance. We've got some time set aside for Q&A at the end. So at the bottom of your screen, you can submit questions based on the sort of topics that we talk about. If you'd like to ask any specific questions of Linzi, then please do so. But without any further ado, I think I'll turn to you, Linzi, and do you want to give us a bit of an introduction in terms of the context of today's chat?
Of course, I will do. Thank you, Simon. So what, as Simon said, what we found and what I'm sure those of you on the call have found as well is that you've got really high hopes when a project starts, and sometimes they're multi-year projects. They can be very complex, and those high hopes are that you sail very easily towards the results that you've hoped for. But there's many, if you like, hidden circumstances that don't naturally kind of fit into a project plan that you have to be aware of and to plan for. And one of the big ones is that people generally don't give up well-established ways of working that easily, whether that's a fear of uncertainty that comes with change, or they're really invested in the ways of working that they've helped to develop over the years. They might be skeptical of the benefits of what's been introduced. Whatever those things might be, they are really worth taking into account up front. And so in order to try and minimise that dip, what we would say generally is that what we want to have instead of that is really a reliable path towards the results that we've set out. And so we talk about it in three, sort of managing in three phases. They're not necessarily linear in terms of following one another, and you might sort of loop back. But we talk about readiness, getting the whole organisation in the best possible position to deliver the changes that are ahead, and to do that efficiently and effectively and with minimal risk of that sort of big chunk of cost when performance dips. We talk about when the change is introduced being reliable, so that there's the full participation of the teams to go live with a new solution with a minimal disruption to operations. And then finally, the results and rolling these results out and moving really swiftly from what you might say is the end of a project into continuous improvement. And if those projects are multi-year, complex, in some cases quite draining, we all know when we get caught up with a problem to solve, then your head's down and sometimes you forget to take a breath. But during those times, what we believe matters most are really 5 things. A really key understanding of the alignment and the vision and where you're heading. Some measures of success, so you know when you're getting there or when you've actually got there. Having the capability and the capacity and the experience at your disposal to smooth the way and know that you're not going to be frustrated by the lack of resource or having the wrong mix of skills. Effective communications and engagement. So really importantly, it's that 2-way communication, that asking for feedback, that acting and not acknowledging that feedback, and providing support to make sure that people don't feel at any point stranded. And then the final thing really is for leaders of change, and I guess as many of you on the call now, who take ownership, accountability for actually making that better, for helping people get through to those results. And in these multi-year projects, one of the problems we have is that dip in morale as we go. And we thought it was worth just exploring and bringing in some of our experiences to why morale is one of those things that people might comment on, but not necessarily decide to proactively do something about. But it is a huge risk to the success of your project. It contributes significantly to that dip that we saw earlier. And it really is worth getting on the front foot with it. And really understanding in the context of your organisation what is low morale. And I think it's worth saying that it can be quite subtle. It might be a very general sense of dissatisfaction or a sort of sense of, or even sometimes a bit of an uneasy quiet in the room, in the operation, people not really sort of speaking too much. You might notice a bit of demotivation or disengagement. But there will always be a noticeable reduction in productivity and performance. And I guess that's how we define morale. And so even from that definition, those things are not necessarily anything that you want to see in your operation. And if the project is going on for a couple of years, then it's going to go through peaks and troughs, the morale. So it is worth keeping an eye on. I think there are some statistics, from Gallup, I think it was a couple of years ago, probably pre-COVID, which suggested that a dip in morale could cost you up to 20% in terms of productivity, which, if someone offered you a solution to 20% of your productivity, I guess you'd probably have a look into it and try to do something about it.
Sure. You've talked there about, I guess, sensing low morale in terms of atmosphere and things like that. Is there anything that, being in logistics with like harder measures typically, don't we? So is there a harder measure? Do you go out and ask people how happy they are every week? Or how do you go about it?
And I think you absolutely can, have your ear to the ground and genuinely don't shy away from some of those questions that you might not naturally ask. I think hard measures that you might see, at its worst, you'll see potentially increased absenteeism, heightened employee turnover, really quite hard measures. And the other one that might be a very clear symptom would be, continually missed deadlines with no real underlying sort of hard evidence as to a particular risk or an issue that was taking longer to resolve or a solution that was taking longer to develop than you thought. Those things, it's definitely worth looking at whether it is a function of morale. And sort of the less hard measures than absenteeism or turnover or deadlines, you might notice things like people taking a lack of initiative. And whilst that might not be something you could measure, it would be demonstrable in terms of, you ask for a volunteer, you ask for people to contribute to a particular workshop, you get less volunteers than you've had in the past. The usual people aren't putting their hand up. It's whole that reduced teamwork and collaboration can be a real sort of indication that people are taking a bit of a step back. You might also see sort of quality drops, so more errors, more mistakes, where people are just not leaning into the problem, just not putting in the effort that you've seen before, because that feels like just a step too far to them at any point in time.
Okay, fine. So we've got some measure, we've got some sense, we feel that morale's dropping. What do we do? How do we go and find the root causes, and so we can deal with them?
Yeah, and I think it depends on the impact that it's having in your particular team. I think if you are seeing potentially a lack of confidence, or the team aren't owning a particular problem, or they don't quite feel connected to the mission that they've got, then those sorts of things come into, if you like, communication and transparency. So when employees feel well informed about goals and strategies and the changes that are going on, and sometimes even just the rationale for a decision, that is an opportunity for them, if you like, to kind of feel that they're more part of that future. So from a leadership perspective, being a bit more direct about communication, being much more transparent if you can. And I think then natural extension of that is to give employees a voice, to feel that they are able to contribute to the debate and that they're listened to. And these things are they're not difficult to do. They require time and they require planning. And finding opportunities for teams to be involved in the decision making is brilliant, because it encourages a sense of ownership. If you also are able to, in any way, even in a small way, give them a say in shaping the work that's ahead, then that has a number of real positives. In the first instance, it really encourages people to think a little bit more deeply about what's ahead. On the other side of that, it potentially frees up time for leaders to be looking even further ahead. If you're setting your teams the challenge of shaping what might things look like in 12 weeks, then you as a leader potentially have the capacity to look even further ahead. And that's incredibly useful. And I think that's also very motivating for teams, because they know that they're kind of on a winning side with an organisation that's looking more to the future. So I think leaders need to put some effort into finding the right channels for feedback that feel most useful to engage people. So it's not, oh, let's have a survey every week, or necessarily put things that are very rigid in place. You can even start with an anonymous suggestion box. You might ask how people are feeling, but you might also ask, what more could we do to make you feel comfortable with this change? What more could we do to get you involved in what's going on? And there'll be those that even write their names on the anonymous suggestions, but those, sometimes it is just a step in the right direction to get people talking, and then you build some trust, and that is then valued between all parties. Those relationships that you make across the organisation that can really help you when the pressure's on. All of this communication and transparency and getting people involved, inviting them to be involved, will really make a difference. And I think it is those in leadership positions addressing the concerns rather than hoping they'll go away. Acknowledge that there are challenges, and kind of watch out, because in multi-year projects, those challenges are not necessarily all resolved up front. There will be various tipping points along the way where morale will dip, and just because something worked in the past doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to work for the next phase or the next few weeks. So continually checking in, setting a positive tone, being the one from a leadership perspective that's looking for the possibilities and the opportunities, and also recognising where extra support is absolutely needed and providing that extra support. I think projects are often at their outset an opportunity for growth or for new skills, or to have some different mentoring or coaching, whichever feels right. But that needs to continually evolve. You can't sort of set it out at the beginning and then it's okay forevermore. So leaders being really vigilant and checking in, but checking in a variety of ways. I think it's probably also worth mentioning that appreciation or a lack of appreciation often contributes to low morale. And if you're implementing some kind of system or acknowledging when people are working hard, or even it's just a tiny weeny change in what they're doing, or you're actually actively looking for some positives so that you can boost morale and motivate people, that's really important. And that's not the annual review kind of appreciation, that's in the moment, and that's sometimes absolutely going out and looking for opportunities to acknowledge the hard work, and to appreciate that. So I think those things are, I guess, some of the things to be aware of, whether you're either avoiding or trying to avoid low morale, or recovering a situation where potentially through the peaks and troughs of a project, you've seen individuals start to be burnt out or overworked, and therefore, sort of protecting themselves by disengaging slightly. And if they're some of your top problem solvers, that's where your 20% dip in productivity is going to come from.
Sure. Okay. I really like a couple of things that you said in there. One was actually going out to the team and asking them, what do you need in order to, to feel better about this, rather than, I think as project leadership teams, we often fall into the trap of feeling like we have to have all the answers because we know where we're going, and therefore, whereas actually being open to say, right, what do you need, and what can we put in place to make you get you guys into a better place, shows that sense of, I guess, slight vulnerability, but also an openness to hear them and know what they're around. Okay. In terms of real life examples, in terms of case study or whatever of this type of thing, what have you experienced before, Linzi?
I think at this kind of one end of the scale, there are organisations that we've worked with that say we're great at change, we're really brilliant, and that's brilliant, very positive attitude and a positive mindset. I think when we sort of dip below that and ask a few more questions, what we sometimes find is that they are great at starting change. And there's a couple of organisations that we've worked with in the last year or so where they are so enthusiastic at the beginning, that is a real positive. Of course it is. But they then believe they don't need any help, or they don't need to do anything differently. And that can be tricky, because actually when you ask them, so what do you define as being good at change? Or, well, we are enthusiastic, we all take it on, we never say no. But and the three organisations I'm thinking of all had very similar traits then, because what actually happens is they're very enthusiastic for the first part, for the startup, it's all very new and sparkly. But at the point where there are problems to solve, or there's a couple of missed deadlines, maybe because the plan was too ambitious, and then people's spirit starts to drop. And they then describe themselves as being good at starting change, but not necessarily finishing it and not getting it through to the results. And the morale drops at the point where you feel that for the 6th time or the nth time, it's going to fizzle out and we won't really get the benefits. And then that kind of translates into, so why should we bother? Why will we put the extra effort in? Because something always comes left field and stops us, or the next new project comes in and we don't quite finish off the one we had before. And it's those sorts of things where I genuinely think that if the morale of the team, the spirit of the team, and the performance of the team over and above defining process or building sites or whatever that might be, if that feeling in that spirit becomes a key measure of your success as a project team, I genuinely think if you track that in the way you tracked other things, that we would get to the result quicker. We would avoid such a big dip in performance. And these things they're not hard, they're not prescriptive. I have a real aversion to checklists because I think they get you going, but they don't help you to adapt to the situation that you're in. But if you look at change that you've done before, you look how successful it was, you look where you didn't do so well and learn from that, that's a really good way of looking forward. And for us, when we're working with clients, we do, when they say they're good at change, we don't just accept that we dip below that and we say, well, what are your strengths? What makes you great at it? But actually, when has it been disappointing and what could we do to avoid that again? So in those clients, we have helped them to sort of just appraise their ability to change, to handle a change. Because actually they want to be successful, of course they do. So just adding this other string to their bow in terms of the spirit of the team and the morale of the team can be really, really powerful. Not just in terms of that particular project, but sometimes the reputation of the organisation. If people have worked there and they've burnt out and the morale is low, attracting new talent can be incredibly difficult to do. And, we would rarely have clients where they've only got one project on the go. So they're recruiting new talent and being able to say, you're looked after here, it's really busy, but it's a great atmosphere. When morale dips, you can't expect it not to, but when it does, we actively do something about that. And I think those in leadership positions need to see it as their problem to solve, not the team's issue. I think that would be the other kind of real life example is, the team are worn out, they just need to pull their socks up. And whilst it might not be quite as brutal as that language, it's not often seen as a problem of leadership.
Yeah.
But it is frankly their problem to solve.
Sure, understood. Okay, we've got a few questions that have come in, Lindsay, so we'll move on to those if that's okay. So Paul has asked, what are your thoughts on outsourcing pastoral care versus keeping it in-house? Unusually for one of these webinars, this is one I can answer because it's what we do at Hatmill. When we at Hatmill, we work slightly differently in that we don't have a hierarchy with managers. And one of the things is, how do you still deliver pastoral care to the team if you haven't got a line manager? And what we all reflected on was most of the line managers we'd had in our past weren't that great at pastoral care. They were great at driving performance and asking us to do the things that needed to be done. So we turned to external coaches. So all the team at Hatmill have external coaches for their pastoral care and their development conversations. We find that works really well because they're external. You can put a confidential wrapper around it. So whatever you want to talk about with your coach stays between you and the coach, unless you agree that other people should be involved and shared in it. And that gives you that space to be able to talk about whether you're not getting on with a colleague or whether even if you're not getting on with your partner at home or whatever, and work on that. Because if the person's happier and working the right way, then they're better positioned to perform at work. So I'm a big fan of outsourcing pastoral care, in my view. We've got a couple of questions. Shall I just move on, Lindsay, to the next one, if that's all right?
Can I add one thing to that, which is in a project setting, if you are a leader who is leading a big change for the first time, then I would highly recommend a mentor or a coach outside of the organisation for you as a leader of change to make sure that some of the things we've talked about today, you've got the confidence to dive into, especially if you're new to it and new to this as a concept.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you. Next question is, if autonomous teams become self-managing and are empowered to make change, how are directors best kept informed about what decisions have been taken? I think this is an interesting. Shall I ever go? I can do this as well, Lindsay. I'm on a roll.
Go for it.
I think if you've got autonomous teams and they're self-managing and empowered to make change, you need a process by which they can make that change. We use something called the advice process, and the advice process means that you need to engage with anyone who's an expert in the area or who will be affected by the decision. I suspect that if any of the changes that are being made directors are required, or they're part of that body in terms of either going to be affected or have some expertise. So therefore, despite the teams being having the delegated authority to make those changes, they should probably be engaging with the right directors anyway as part of that change. That doesn't mean the director's making the decision, but the decision is still sort of sits with the team. But they have to make sure that they engage, as all good businesses would, with everyone who is going to be affected by a particular decision. And then in terms of the being kept informed, you just need really good open communication structures. So whether that's weekly bulletins, huddles, town halls, whatever it is, that's around the informed thing. But I think they need to be consulted as well where relevant would be my response to that. Anything you'd add, Lindsay?
I think again, a little bit like, if you're new to this, but if you are in that working in more of those kind of agile ways, then I think the confidence to delegate is actually an acquired skill for a leader. I don't think that's something that often comes naturally, especially if you've been an expert in that area yourself. It's really difficult to let go of some of those decisions. So, but genuinely build the confidence to delegate to those teams. Focus on the outcomes. If they're getting there, then do you really need some of the, you need to trust them to get there. Do you really need all of the bullet points in between to be informed? And one of the other, sort of, I suppose, relatively gentle ways to keep yourself in the loop as a leader would be an offer of support at any particular time. So what do you need? What issues or risks can I help with? And as Simon said, if you're involved in some form of the advice process, then people are going to seek you out. If your door is open, if your expertise is quite clear for people to see, and if you've created an environment where they feel absolutely safe to do so, you I'm sure wouldn't be kept out of the loop.
Yeah. Okay. And probably time for a really quick one before we come to you for a summary, Lindsay. So also asked is, what are your thoughts on self-defined pay and how should that be justified by the individual? So 2 quick points on this from me, and we don't do self-defined pay at Hatmill, but one, if you are doing self-defined pay, I think it's got to be entirely transparent. So people need to know what everyone else are paying themselves and how they are, and they also need to explain the reasons and in order to justify it. Because I think if you can keep that tension between this is what I contribute and this is what I'm being paid, and have that social tension that holds that within a sense of reality, then I think there is a way to make a system work. There's a great section in Frederick Laloux's book, Reinventing Organizations, on this, and it gives you a number of examples of how different companies have gone around managing the processes of self-defined pay. So that's my answer for that. Lindsay, we probably haven't got time for you to answer it and still do your summary. So could we go straight to your summary of today's point?
Yeah, of course. So there are 5 takeaways today. Really calculate the impact of low morale on your deadlines and on your productivity. If you've only got half of your team on board, you're really not pulling your full weight in terms of the project, the outcomes or the results that you're going to get. So make sure that they're all on board. Really understand what the difference it's going to make. The second one being, we've mentioned some of the symptoms of low morale. Don't ignore them. Look out for them, whether that's missed deadlines, people stopping speaking up as they used to, less collaboration than you've seen before. Those things can be quite visible, but you've got to go looking for them. The third one is be really open and direct with your communication. Share what you can, ask people what they want to know, actively seek their feedback, but really importantly, acknowledge it. And acknowledge the challenges and frustrations that they might have. The fourth one is try and set that really positive tone, especially when teams need a boost. This is not someone else's problem. If you're the leader of the change, if you're the leader of a particular function or a team, then you need to be the one that takes actions and accountability to improve a situation that you can see. And you really can make some positive and really impactful choices in terms of how you choose to lead during difficult times on a project. And then finally, a really big one, and it's kind of been the theme of the last three huddles that we've done, is invest in the organisation being ready for change. Really do your homework on what the glide path is towards from where you are now towards the results that you want. What support and capability and capacity are you going to need along the way? Can you let teams know what to expect? Can you put some thought into it in advance? And can you really get under the skin of the vision and paint a picture of why the future will be better? And if you can do that, I'm pretty sure that you'll notice even the small steps that people take. And if you can acknowledge and reward those appropriately along the way and continually do this and shift your approach depending on where you are on the project, I think the chances of avoiding that dip will increase significantly.
Fantastic. Thanks, Linzi. We're out of time. The links to the previous two huddles have now been pasted into the chat. If you've enjoyed this one so much, you'd like to go and see the others if you didn't catch them already. Thanks for joining us today. Hope you've enjoyed it. Hope that, thank you for submitting the questions. And well, we hope to see you soon. Have a great day. Take care. Bye.
Bye.